All right, welcome back, everyone. We are now talking about inputting information. So we've gone through all of the different steps of this action planning process. If you want to use the template yourself, let us know. You can contact us and we will send you your own. In this process of taking all that information from our action planning and putting it into a format that's really user-friendly, we'll take these different components of the action plan and put them into Google Sheets, as I mentioned. When you've emailed us, you've asked to be given one of these action tracker templates, we will send you an email from Google and you will get an email like you see here with the arrow. You click on Open in Sheets and it will pop up for you. So once you've gotten into the Google Sheet, you can, like I said, save the sheet to your Google Drive. You can bookmark this link. You can keep going back to your email to get here, whatever you would like to do. Okay? If you want to save it to your drive, this is where you would go. So once you've opened it, you click on that little button, it saves it to your drive. You can click on your web browser in the top right corner where it has the link. If you go to any Google page, you just type in Google, it will bring this up. So you can see if you click on where there are the 9 different small tiny boxes up at the top right, it brings in a drop-down menu and you can click on your Drive account. If you have saved this spreadsheet, as I said, to your Drive account, you can always access it from here as well. You can see here on this action tracker, we've got a few lines at the top that define all the different categories for what information is where. And then we're going to walk you through how all of these different pieces fit together. Okay? You stick the objectives in the rows that say objectives. And then everything underneath that should be the activities related to that specific objective. Alternatively, if you were doing this on sticky notes or on some other piece of paper on a blackboard or a whiteboard, you just start typing in these different activities, okay? So that's this column B that you can see here. You just write in or copy paste in all the different activities that you've come up with and the different themes. So here you can see we've got an objective listed in row 5. It's kind of covered up by the arrow, but you can see we've got our SMART objective put in there. We then have row 6, which says theme 1. So based on the categories and themes that you came up with as you were organizing your list of activities, you can write in different names for all of those themes. You may have many more rows under this objective than this, or you might have less. So we'll talk about how you can make some of those changes in just a minute. As you're writing in each of the different activities, you want to keep them brief in this first column that's listed activities and actions. Try to stick to about 3 to 5 words, otherwise it starts to get hard to read. If you want to add in additional information, put those in the next column over. So where it says detailed task description. That's where you can type as much as you want. If you want to put paragraphs and paragraphs in there to be very clear about everything that needs to happen, go ahead and do that. You don't have to. You can leave that detailed task description totally blank if you want. But if you want to be able to add more information, that's where you put it. Make sure your activities and actions column is kept to a very minimal number of words. Enough that you know what you're talking about and that it's clear to someone else, they can figure out what you mean, but without having too much clutter there. Okay, so we typically try and keep it at 3 to 5 words. So at this point, you're now adding in all this content. You're adding in one activity per row all the way down. If you need to either add or delete rows, that's really easy to do. As you can see here, I've highlighted rows 14, 15, and 16. If I do that and then I right-click while those are highlighted, it's going to show a drop-down menu. So if I want to delete rows, I just move my mouse down and I click delete rows 14 through 16. If we had extra rows there, that's what that's for. It'll get rid of those. If, on the other hand, we don't have enough space and I need to be adding in more activities, I can choose insert 3 above, which will mean it will put 3 rows in between 13 and 14, or insert 3 below, which means it will put in 3 rows between row 16 and row 17. We move on next to our next step, which is who's responsible. So again, we're going to ignore the detailed task description column for just a minute and say that we're working on a theme that is volunteers. So our first activity was going to be identify the current volunteers. That's listed on row 7, which is marked as 1 here. Okay, our first activity under volunteers, identify the current ones. Who is going to be responsible for that? We already talked about the planning of all of that. You just look at your sheet, look at your notes where you wrote that down before, and you're going to add that person's name or their role to the responsible column. We then move on to the next activity, recruit new volunteers. Who's going to be responsible for that? Input that, okay? So after we do both of those things, we're going to move over to our time questions again. So you can see on the far left of this little screenshot is responsible. So we would have already filled that out. And we're going to be working on the same 2 activities, identifying our current volunteers and recruiting new volunteers, okay? So the first thing that we do is we take what we decided about the start month and we type that in under the start month column. It's pretty straightforward. Next, we take the information and then the decisions that we made about duration and we put that under duration. Then, when we're done with that, we take the information that we decided about whether this activity is recurring or not, and we put it here. So, at this point, you're going to have start month and duration and recurring all filled in. So for this specific example, we could say, okay, we're going to start the first activity in June of 2019. It's going to take us 3 months, and it is not a recurring activity. For our second activity, this will be happening beginning in August of 2019. It will take 1 month, and we need to redo this activity every 3 months. So at this point, we've now filled out all of the different information that we have already come up with in terms of our action plan. We have a spreadsheet that tells us what the objectives are, what these different categories are for our activities, the list of activities, who's responsible, when it needs to happen, how long it's going to take, whether it's recurring or not. So we've got a pretty good summary of all of the different pieces the different things that we need to do to make this happen. Our next step is one of the steps that helps translate all of that information into a very practical format that you can use in your proposal. So yes, all of this planning, the planning is very important and it's very helpful in terms of clarifying in your own minds what you're doing and why you're doing it and who needs to be involved and how long it's going to take. But creating a timeline has even additional benefits. So if you look a little bit further to the right on this spreadsheet, we have a couple more columns that are labeled by month. You can ignore the status column that's in the middle for right now. That would be used later on once we're working on tracking a program that has been funded, and we would explain that how that works for you. So in creating this timeline, what we're going to do is we're going to put in an X for each of the relevant months to create a visual timeline. So our first month listed here, it's got that second red arrow above it, is June. So June of 2019. We said for our first activity that it would start in June of 2019. So we put an X in the box for June of 2019. What happens is the Google Sheet is set up so that it will automatically make that cell, that box, turn gray. You do the same thing in the next box over because we said that this first activity that starts in June of 2019 is going to take 3 months. So we fill in the box for June and July and for August. That leaves us with 3 grayed out cells during those 3 months, creating a visual timeline for that activity. This is when that activity is going to happen. When we look at our next activity, our second activity, it will start in August of 2019. It only takes 1 month, but it happens every 3 months. So we put our first X in the box for August of 2019. It turns gray. We count over 3 months to September, October, November. We put an X in November. It turns gray. Now we have a timeline, visual timeline for Activity 1 and Activity 2 that's really easy to look at a glance and be able to see what you're doing as part of this program in order to achieve the specific objectives that you've set. All right? So, a couple more hints, things that make this tool even more useful. So, in Google Sheets, it's really easy to hide columns in a very similar way as deleting or inserting columns or rows. What you would do is you would highlight the columns that you want to hide. So in this case, we're going to hide the start month, the duration, the recurring, and the status columns. So you're going to choose columns E, F, G, and H, and you select all of those, and then you right-click, just like we did for adding rows, but now we're working on columns. So when you right-click, if you move down past inserting and deleting, you can see there's one that says hide columns E through H. If you click on that, it's going to make those columns disappear temporarily. They're not gone, they're not deleted. You can always bring them back, you can unhide them, but they will go away temporarily. So on this specific spreadsheet that we've created, on this template that we've created, when you are working, after you've created this whole timeline and you've entered in all of your activities and all the information about them and you've created this visual timeline, what we want is for you to be able to take screenshots of this and use it. Put it into your proposal. Don't recreate everything from scratch. Just use this tool that you've already put everything into and use it in your proposal. You don't have to, this is not required, but it would be, from a reviewer's perspective, very helpful to be able to see this type of detail, okay? Again, you don't have to include every single tiny little activity when we're doing this for the purposes of a proposal, but seeing the big picture activities is really helpful for reviewers so that they can see why what you're doing is connected to what you are trying to accomplish. So what we want to do is get rid of the extraneous detail. We don't need them to see everything or to see duplicates of information. We just created this visual timeline. Let's use that, and we're going to hide the details column that has all those detailed descriptions that you may or may not have decided to use. We're going to hide the start month, we're going to hide the duration, we're going to hide the recurring, and we're going to hide the status columns, okay? So once we go through that process, this is what we see. This is our action tracker. Our program is Eat Well, Be Well. Here's our first objective, focusing specifically on the category of volunteers. We have 2 activities listed. We're going to identify the current volunteers, recruit new volunteers. The coordinator will be responsible for the first activity, and it's going to happen starting in June, moving through to the end of August. The lead promotora, or the community health worker, is going to be responsible for recruiting new volunteers, and that's going to happen every 3 months, starting in August, then again in November, and on and on and on. So as you've gone through and you've filled out this whole form, you now have a nice summary chart that you can do a screenshot of and plug right into your proposal document. Once you've done that and you've taken that screenshot and you want to pull back and have some of that other additional detail viewable, you just unhide or you open the columns again. So all you have to do to make the columns that are hidden appear again is if you look at the top row, there's those 2 little arrows that point opposite directions. Click on either one of those and boom, it's back to where it was. It makes all of those hidden columns come back and be visible again. So in terms of action planning, that's pretty much it. We've walked you through the whole process, how to go through all of the different steps, and then how to put it into this format that makes it really easy for you to use in your proposal.